CPD Show. Welcome back to That CPD Show. My guest today on the podcast is Beth Collingridge of the Single Friendly Church Network. The Single Friendly Church Network exists to encourage churches to welcome and value single people at every stage of life and want to inspire a movement of churches that do so. It's a great conversation that Beth and I had, and we dive all into how the church can better look after the single people in their congregation. We dive into some really interesting statistics around that and some really practical ways that we can think about serving and discipling the single people in our congregations. So I hope you enjoy the podcast, and let's go over to that conversation I had with Beth Collingridge. Welcome back to That CPD Show. My name is Chris. I'll be the host for today. And today on the podcast, I'm joined by Beth Collingridge of Single Friendly Church. Beth, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to have you. And we're going to be talking all about talking about Single Friendly Church and how we can be better and thinking about all of the area of singleness. But before we dive into this, it is a bit of a tradition on this podcast, as you hopefully well know, that we do like to talk about our favorite dessert. So, Beth, what is your favorite dessert?
I mean, I think this is a very important question, so I'm fully behind it. It's very hard to choose. Sometimes I love an apple crumble because, you can have it with ice cream, you can have it with custard, you can have it with cream, but I would actually go with tiramisu. And I'm currently on the hunt to find the best tiramisu in London. I've tried it at lots of different Italian restaurants, haven't found the best one yet, but, we're hopeful.
Oh, I do love a tiramisu. I have to say, it's actually if you do go back to the sort of the long back catalogue of this podcast, which I don't expect you to do, it's fine. But that was my choice. Actually, my favorite dessert choice was a tiramisu. Just great, isn't it? So tell me, why do you love a tiramisu so much?
I think it's always different, but I like that it's got different layers. You've got the cream, and then you've got the sponge, and then there's like a bit of kind of coffee, goodnessy liquid, and then there's often some chocolate on top. It's just, I don't know, it's just it's got something for everyone.
It has got a bit of everything. I mean, I love coffee. Secondly, it's the mixture of the coffee with the foam fingers that just really, it's a great choice, isn't it?
Yeah, particularly when it's fluffy. Fluffy is always good.
Yes, that's right. Yep, absolutely. So have you got any sort of particular recommendations of a really good tiramisu in London? So if anyone's in London, they can go, right, this place will give you the best tiramisu.
Yeah, so there's a place called Ciao Bella, which is a really good authentic Italian spot. And they do a really good tiramisu, and they also do it in massive portions as well, which is
Ooh.
another very important thing. Because when you order a tiramisu and they serve it in a tiny little cup and you get about 2 mouthfuls, that's always very disappointing.
Yes, it's a good point. You do not want something that you can eat too quickly, because I think it's a big dessert for me. It's not a little sort of dainty thing. You don't want to, it's get a big spoon and go for it. So yeah, really good choice. Yeah, excellent. Very, very, very good. And I mean, it's always a good time. I mean, this is all about sort of development, this podcast, but I always think that development is best with dessert. So it just seems to work for me. So
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. The more dessert, the merrier.
brilliant. Okay, tiramisu, great choice there. Beth, you're here to talk about Single Friendly Church. Talk to me about Single Friendly Church. Talk to me about the mission behind it. Tell me how you managed to get involved with it and things like that.
Yeah, so we are a charity. We used to be just a kind of an organization. I'll explain about that in a minute, but we became a charity officially 18 months ago. And our vision is really to see single people welcomed, valued, and included in kind of all churches. And this is single people of all ages and stages of life. So people who've never been married, also those who are divorced, widowed, single parents, and kind of all ages and stages.
No, that's brilliant and really, really needed. And let's dive into some of that then. What are some of those challenges that you think that single Christians face in the church? Do you think? What are some of those big challenges?
Yeah, so the reason we exist is we came out of a piece of research that the dating website Christian Connection did, and they did this of their single members about 10 or 12 years ago now, and they just kind of wanted to find out a little bit more about what their single members thought about church, and so they gave out this really big survey, thinking maybe they'd get a few hundred responses, and overnight about 3,000 single people responded and just really poured out their hearts about how they felt in their churches. And kind of through that, Single Friendly Church has kind of formed, and now we've developed resources to kind of help the church to change this. But what a lot of single people in the survey, the initial research said, is that a lot of their churches feel very family focused. So often the language revolves around family. They celebrate things to do with family, like Mother's Day, which has come up quite recently, and kind of thinking about kind of other aspects. We celebrate marriage and parents, and often single people feel like their lives aren't also worth celebrating because of that family focus. People often also maybe feel accepted by the church, but they don't feel included in the social life that is going on in the church. Often you see kind of couples inviting other couples around for a meal, and single people often don't feel like they're included in those invitations, or perhaps they're on the edges and they're just not seen by the welcome team. And then sometimes we find that single people between the ages of 30 and 60 feel that the church doesn't know what to do with them, because perhaps the church has like a young adults ministry for people like students and people in their 20s. They have really good ministry for older people. They've got parents groups and perhaps support for single parents. But single people without children between those kind of ages sometimes feel that there isn't a group for them, or there isn't a category or anything for them. And it's quite ironic to think that Jesus himself would actually be in this category as well, being a single man in his 30s when he started his ministry. So those are some of the barriers. And then also, one thing that surprised me when I first started working for the organization is actually hearing from people who've been widowed. And perhaps initially there's this kind of rush of support and love for them. But after a while, actually they find that their social invitations dry up because people maybe don't think to invite them anymore because they're not in a couple. So that can be quite a challenge and a barrier for people as well.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, you're absolutely right. Jesus was, when he was on earth, was a single man in his 30s, and I think we sometimes forget that. And I wonder whether we create some kind of those kind of barriers, maybe unintentionally so. Yeah, are there some things that you think that churches are doing that maybe they need to really think through about those kind of unintentional barriers? And how can you, I mean, I'm talking as a man that's been married for 16 years, and so I'm not in that space of being single, and so, but I think for many church leaders maybe they're similar or the same, and so thinking through and being empathetic of someone, thinking into the experiences that people who are single go through. What are some of those kind of unintentional barriers that I think that we maybe miss if you're a church leader that's married and don't think about these kind of things?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good point. Firstly, that it's often, I'd say 99% of the time, it's never intentional, and it's just that, if you haven't experienced singleness as an adult, then you just perhaps won't think about it or you won't see it. But yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers is language, and particularly the use of the word family. And this isn't just single people, also, it could be married couples without children who struggle with this word, or perhaps you've grown up with a difficult experience of family as a child. But sometimes the way that the church seems to focus on this word, and sometimes we mean it as a good thing. We talk about the family of God, which is such an important thing. But actually, the word family can be quite loaded for some people, and can bring up all sorts of different kind of pain and different experiences. So thinking about how we use that word to describe services, or in our announcements, or even in our names. Like some churches are family church, and obviously they mean that the church is one big family, but it needs to be explained from the front what that really means, so that people don't come in with their biases or think because I'm not part of a traditional family unit that I can't come by myself, which of course is never really the case. And I think also just coming by yourself is possibly one of the biggest barriers that single people face in coming to church. And actually, one thing that we talk about a lot is actually people who are married, but their spouse isn't a Christian, or perhaps doesn't attend church. So they are very much single in church and they're coming by themselves as well. And so we have all sorts of people in our churches who, at one point or another, they had to come into church by themselves for the first time. And some churches can make that really easy and they have fantastic welcome teams. Some churches maybe need to work on it so much. And then other churches need to think about what's that welcome journey from someone walking through the door to fully feeling kind of as though they belong and that they're in the heart of the church. And, they don't just get a leaflet on the way in and then they don't really know where to sit and no one speaks to them afterwards. So I think those are a few barriers.
I mean, I've never thought about that. The word family. I mean, it's obviously what's so brilliant about what you do and single friendly church do is thinking through. Well, even the word family, and I never thought of that that association that it can have. I wonder what's a better way to think that through. Obviously, we don't want to get rid of the word family, but we want to be able to use that better and use better language and better words. What's a better way we can think about it, do you think?
Yeah, I think firstly explaining it and making sure that if you're going to use the word family, make sure there's church in front of it. So some people have family news as a part of their service where they share what's going on in the church family. So even just adding church before that makes it clear that it's about church and it's not just about different nuclear families in the church. If you're having a service that you want to be kind of multi-generational, then I think using kind of all age, all together, worship for all or worship for everyone is something that's become a lot more popular in the last few years. And I think that's quite a good way of getting around that. And actually, but also making sure that when you are doing a service like that, that it actually is for everyone and it's not just focused on the children, but there is also something for the person who's coming by themselves and perhaps isn't a parent.
Yeah, there is such a big focus, and understandably so, for churches on families. I wonder how can we think about ways to engage single people in church and making sure that when family services are run, that it feels engaging and inviting and accessible for single people as well.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think obviously we also don't want people to think that single people don't want to be part of churches with families because actually, that's the beauty of the church is that we've got people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. So most single people really want to be in a multi-generational church and particularly if they didn't have that opportunity to have children themselves, like to be around other families and be welcomed in and actually involved in that family life is really important. So it's just making sure that there's an equal emphasis. So, if you're doing stuff for kind of parents and perhaps you've got like a parenting course and kind of groups for them, that you're also thinking about your single people. Do you have a course on singleness, or do you have a course on friendship, or perhaps just encouraging people to use their gifts and really building them up? If you're just making sure your language is neutral in your service, especially if it's multi-generational, and also just making sure that you're intentionally seeking single people out for leadership opportunities is really important because no matter how single friendly your church feels kind of on the ground, kind of outside of the service, if everyone you see at the front is married or is serving as a couple, then sometimes you can feel as a single person that in order to kind of use your gifts or to be like a mature Christian, mature person of faith, then you've got to graduate into marriage, which we know obviously is not true. And also just encouraging having single role models, I think, is really important as well.
Yeah, you said about that, that it's not about graduating into marriage, but it still seems like there's a kind of a something that still remains within the church that sometimes marriage is seen as the goal. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's still here? And how can we think about that better, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I find it strange because obviously when you look at the Bible, it talks so positively about singleness. You know, you have Paul and what he said about, I wish that all were as I myself am, but he says, but each has their own gift, but he says to the single people, it's good for you to remain single. And then we look at the early church and how, there's stories about how they ate together and they met in each other's homes and they were all one and they included the widows and those who were on their own and made sure that they weren't left out in the distribution of food. So there was all that care in the early church. And then you look at our church now, and we are very focused on kind of marriage and family sometimes, but I think it's just cultural and it's just societal and it's something that's kind of crept in, and we just need kind of better teaching. Actually, in when we've done surveys in our training, most people have said that they've never heard a sermon on singleness. So I think just talking about it a bit more from the front and unpacking what does it mean to live a good single life for Jesus? What like is saying that it's okay to be single and that it's good and for however long you are, and or if you find yourself single again after being married, how can God use you and meet you in that place is something really important.
Yeah, and often I hear, I've heard a lot of when people do address singles, it's often as either a how can we prepare you for marriage kind of
Hmm.
conversation, or making sure you avoid the dangers of being single rather than embracing the God-given gift of singleness. How can we get a better story on that, do you think?
Yeah, and it is difficult because the majority of single people do want to be married. I mean, there are people who feel called to celibacy and called to singleness, and that's really their gift. But a lot of people really would love to have a partner. They'd love to have children, or perhaps they've been married and then, unintentionally or through life or through losing their partner, they find themselves single again and working through that. But I think it's just speaking into the pain or the disappointment or whatever that person finds themselves in, and just just speaking about how as you say, like the opportunities that can come from being single, or perhaps how God can speak into our loneliness. What does the Bible say about being part of the family of God, and how he welcomes in the orphan and the widow, and kind of having more teaching about that could really help.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the things? Do you know of any resources? Do you do any resources yourself in terms of uh, how churches could teach into that, into singleness? Are there some things that you know of that do you think that could be really beneficial to churches?
Yeah, definitely. So we have lots of free resources online, and it's all based on research. We regularly do surveys, and we're hearing from single Christians sharing kind of what they want to see from their churches. And we also talk to churches, and we get really good ideas from them. But the main thing that we do is we have a free audit that churches can work through, and it kind of focuses on 5 different areas of church life, and it shows churches all the great things that they're already doing in each of these areas, and then gives them practical tips of perhaps things they just haven't thought about before that they might want to start doing. And so it talks into things like language, which we've talked about, and welcome and teaching, which is a really big one, thinking about how we can make our kind of sermon illustrations and our life applications in our talks applicable for everyone and not just focused on the family sphere. And also thinking about leadership and, how can we encourage single people to thrive in their gifts. And actually, I think on your last question, thinking about what we can do in terms of teaching about singleness is really you're most happy in your singleness when you feel like you have purpose. So working out what our gifts are and how we can use them to glorify God, whether that's in the church or whether that's in the workplace, in your community where you live, and having something where you really feel that you have a purpose and that you're valued and you can bring something to the world and feel part of something is really, really important.
Absolutely, and I think that when we look through the New Testament, as you said, it does give such a positive picture of singleness from Jesus through to Paul as well, and so I think that there's probably got to be a bit of a culture shift that does need to happen in our churches so that we're being much more aware of the language that we're using, aware of the teaching that we're giving as well, that it's not just all focused around families, and also how we can think about engaging people who are single, and to bring them into the whole, as you said, the church family, as it were, and making sure that utilizing language well on that. I think it's such a fascinating topic, and I think it's so interesting. I think churches, it's just such a really good development area for church leaders to think through. And this podcast is to do with our it's linked to our continuous professional development platform that we run. And one of the areas that we have on the site that we run is to think through people, and it's a kind of a people development area. And we can think about, how we do some, how we talk to people, or how we talk, and there's lots of different ways we can think about people. But actually how we think about engaging single people within the church is a humongously vital part, because there's, I'm sure every church is going to have an actually quite a big slice of their church where it's going to be single people. So I think thinking that through is going to be really, really vital. So Beth, thank you for taking the time. Just before we finish, just have you got any sort of final thoughts you want to just leave us with?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm kind of what you said about church leaders thinking about the single people in their congregations. One thing I didn't share is that actually 40% of the UK adult population is single, so it's a much bigger percentage than we think, and that is people of all ages, and it's actually growing fastest in those aged 50 to 65. So it's definitely not just a kind of student kind of 20s and 30s issue. And also then thinking about those of in our churches who perhaps are married but are coming to church as a single person, that percentage gets even bigger. So I think it's just worth any church leaders or any people listening to the podcast who are part of a local church, just thinking who is in your church, and what are the different types of single people who may be in your church who you maybe haven't thought about how you're reaching before. And perhaps even thinking about your local area and thinking, do you have a lot of single parent families? You could look at the census data. Or do you have a lot of older people who maybe are isolated and looking for friendship? Do you have a lot of younger people or working professionals in their 40s who you could reach? And just thinking about how is this topic relevant to you as a church and you as a community, and then what are you already doing well, and what could you maybe start doing just to reach out to those single people.
No, that's great. I had no idea about that stat, that 40% of the UK population, and that probably means that if it's representative within the church, every church, then that's 40% potentially of every church is filled with single people, and that's a humongous percentage. And so to think through that and how we can really care for people who are single, look after them really well, it's so important. So Beth, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed that conversation. Really important topic for every church leader, minister to dive into, and dive into it whilst you're enjoying tiramisu, obviously.
Of course.
So yes, a very important thing. Everyone listening to this, make sure that you check out Single Friendly Church. Beth, thank you so much for joining me today. Really, really enjoyed it. So thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.